In the remote mountain town of Blackwood Falls, Montana, 36 Catholic priests vanished without a trace between 1978 and 1980. These men of God, ranging from young seminarians to seasoned clergy, simply walked out of their parishes one day and were never seen again. The disappearances began slowly, with isolated cases dismissed as personal crises or transfers to other dioceses. The Vatican's private archives contain witness testimonies so disturbing that church officials sealed them away for over 4 decades, refusing all requests for public disclosure. Tonight, we reveal what really happened behind the walls of St. Augustine's Seminary and the network of parishes that once served this forgotten corner of America. Before we continue with the story of Blackwood Falls, this channel is not for everyone. Only for the most combustible souls who dare to unravel the darkest chapters of American history. If you dare to hear what really happened in the shadows of our past, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments which state you're listening from. Are you brave enough to join our community of true mystery hunters? Let's find out together. What makes this story particularly chilling is that it was not motivated by religious fanaticism or supernatural forces, but by something much more terrifying. The calculated manipulation of faith itself, orchestrated by those who understood that the most effective way to control a community was to first remove its spiritual shepherds. As we piece together the final days of these missing priests, their journal entries reveal a growing awareness that something was fundamentally wrong in Blackwood Falls, something that would force them to choose between their vows and their lives. The priests knew they were being watched. Their final journal entries, discovered decades later, hidden beneath the floorboards of St. Augustine's Seminary, paint a picture of men consumed by a terror they couldn't name or escape. Father Michael Santos wrote in his last entry, "They come at night now, not as shadows but as familiar faces. The townspeople we've served for years stand outside our windows, just watching. Mrs. Henderson brought me soup today, but her eyes were completely black." The pattern was always the same. First came the sleepless nights, then the strange visits from parishioners who seemed different somehow. The priests described feeling like they were being studied, evaluated, measured for something they couldn't understand. Father Rodriguez noted that the town's children had stopped coming to Sunday school entirely, and when he visited their homes, their parents would only speak in whispers. What terrified these men of God wasn't the supernatural. It was the methodical way their congregation was being turned against them. One by one, the people they had baptized, married, and comforted in their darkest hours began to look at them with cold, calculating eyes. The priests realized they weren't dealing with possession or madness, but with something far more sinister. Here's what the Vatican doesn't want you to know. The disappearances weren't random. They weren't the work of a serial killer or a religious cult. According to classified documents obtained through a leaked Vatican investigation, the priests of Blackwood Falls had stumbled upon a government psychological warfare experiment. The town had been selected as a testing ground for mind control techniques designed to break down community structures by eliminating spiritual leadership. The priests weren't killed, they were recruited. The final transmission from Father Santos, recorded on a hidden device in the seminary's basement, reveals the impossible choice they faced: submit to the program and become part of the experiment, or watch their entire congregation suffer the consequences. The recording captures Father Santos's voice, broken and defeated. "They showed us what they could do to the children. The most disturbing part isn't that 36 priests vanished. It's that they're still alive, still part of the program, still working in parishes across America under new identities. The experiment never ended, it expanded. But if that's true, then who are the priests serving in your local churches today? But if that's true, then who are the priests serving in your local churches today?" The answer came from the most unexpected source. Maria dos Santos lives in a modest apartment in São Paulo, Brazil. She's 83 years old, nearly blind, and spends most of her days knitting scarves for her great-grandchildren. You wouldn't look twice at her on the street, but Maria holds a secret that could expose the entire Blackwood Falls conspiracy. See, she had a security clearance that allowed her to clean the restricted floors after midnight. Most nights, she worked alone, invisible to the diplomats and officials who never bothered to notice the elderly woman emptying their trash cans. But Maria noticed everything. She kept detailed notes in a small notebook, writing down the strange conversations she overheard, the late-night meetings between American officials and Brazilian psychiatrists. One night in December 1979, Maria found a document that had fallen behind a filing cabinet. The destination was marked as classified, but Maria recognized the code numbers. They matched the psychiatric research facility outside São Paulo, where her own brother had disappeared 20 years earlier. The bombshell revelation came when Maria compared the manifest to recent parish assignments across Brazil. 36 American priests had been quietly integrated into Brazilian churches between 1980 and 1981. All of them claimed to be missionaries seeking to serve in South America. All of them had perfectly forged Vatican credentials. But here's what made Maria's blood run cold. She had been cleaning the same church in São Paulo for 40 years. The priest who had served there since 1981 spoke English with no accent when he thought no one was listening. Father Miguel Santos. He shared her last name, but they had never met before he arrived from America. Maria kept watching him for decades, documenting his strange behavior, how he never seemed to age properly, how he would disappear for weeks at a time, claiming to visit sick relatives who didn't exist, how he would receive late-night phone calls and speak in codes she had heard at the embassy. Last month, Maria finally gathered the courage to confront him after Sunday Mass. She asked him directly about Blackwood Falls, about the other priests, about the program that brought him to Brazil. Father Miguel smiled at her with those same cold, calculating eyes the Montana priests had described in their journals. His response chilled her to the bone. "You've been watching me for 40 years, Maria. If the Blackwood Falls priests are still alive and operating in parishes around the world, how many other communities are being controlled without knowing it?" Maria dos Santos looked into my eyes through the video call, her weathered hands trembling as she reached for something off-screen. "You want to know what Father Miguel told me next?" She held up a faded photograph. Even through the grainy connection, I could see it clearly. 36 men in black robes, standing in front of a building that definitely wasn't a church. The architecture was wrong, too modern, too sterile. "This picture was in his desk drawer," Maria whispered. "I found it when I cleaned his office last week." The photograph was stamped December 15, 2023, last month. The priests looked exactly the same as they had in 1979. Not older, not different, exactly the same. "But that's impossible," I said, though my voice caught in my throat. "People age." Maria's laugh was bitter and hollow. "That's what I thought too, until Father Miguel showed me the real truth. The program didn't just relocate those priests, it preserved them." She leaned closer to the camera, her nearly blind eyes somehow piercing through the screen. "The experiment never ended because it worked too well, but those priests aren't the controllers anymore. They're the controlled. Every Sunday they stand at those altars, speaking words they don't remember choosing. The bombshell hit me like a physical blow. The 36 priests from Blackwood Falls aren't running the program. They're the program's most successful victims." Maria nodded slowly, her face grave with the weight of decades of terrible knowledge. The connection flickered, and for a moment, Maria's face distorted on the screen. When the image cleared, her expression had changed completely. Her eyes were no longer warm and frightened. They were cold and calculating. "You've been very clever," Maria continued, her voice now carrying an authority that made my skin crawl. "Asking all the right questions, following all the right leads. An 83-year-old cleaning lady in São Paulo doesn't just appear on your research radar by accident. Someone wanted you to find her. Someone wanted you to hear this story. Someone wanted you to ask these specific questions about Blackwood Falls. The documents I showed you, the photograph, the embassy connections, all real, all true. But I wasn't just a cleaning lady who stumbled onto a conspiracy. I was placed there. 44 years ago, I was selected to be the witness, the storyteller, the one who would eventually reveal the truth when the time was right. Every detail about the priests, every journal entry, every piece of evidence pointing to government mind control experiments, it's all been carefully preserved and presented to researchers like you for decades. We've been feeding this story to investigators, documentary makers, and conspiracy theorists for over 40 years. Always the same narrative, always the same conclusion. Here's what we never told you. The Blackwood Falls disappearances weren't a government experiment that went wrong. They were a recruitment drive that went exactly as planned. Those 36 priests weren't victims of mind control. They were the original architects of the program. The Catholic Church didn't seal away disturbing testimonies to protect the public. They sealed them away to protect the program. Because the real experiment wasn't about controlling communities by removing spiritual leaders. It was about using spiritual leaders to identify and recruit the most psychologically vulnerable members of society. Every person who comes looking for the truth about Blackwood Falls gets catalogued, studied, evaluated, your search history, your viewing patterns, your social media engagement. It all gets fed into a system that determines whether you're suitable for the next phase. The priests are still out there, still serving in parishes around the world, but they're not victims anymore. They're talent scouts, and every Sunday they look out at their congregations and identify the ones with the right combination of curiosity, isolation, and desperation. The ones who stay up late watching videos about mysterious disappearances. The ones who dig deeper into stories that others dismiss as conspiracy theories. The ones who think they're hunting for the truth when really, the truth has been hunting them. You wanted to know who the priests serving in your local churches really are. Here's your answer. They're exactly who they appear to be. The question you should be asking is why you were so desperate to find a different explanation. You're asking the wrong questions about those priests, Maria said, her voice suddenly steady and clear. You want to know who they really are. She pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to my late husband, Carlos. He was a Vatican translator in the 1970s. Maria's hands shook as she opened the journal. The 36 priests didn't disappear between 1978 and 1980. They all died in a bus accident in December 1977. Every single one of them. The photograph she had shown me earlier fell from between the journal pages, but now I could see what I had missed before. The building behind the priests wasn't modern or sterile. It was a morgue. The priests serving in parishes around the world since 1978, the ones in Brazil, the ones who never age properly, they're not the original men from Blackwood Falls. They're replacements. Maria leaned forward, her weathered face inches from the camera. But here's what terrifies me most about this whole situation. The connection started to flicker again, and Maria's final words came through in broken fragments. The question isn't who killed the priests of Blackwood Falls. Who is standing at the altar of your local church this Sunday? But that photograph I showed you. Maria's voice cracked as she set it down on the table. The old woman's hands trembled as she reached for something else off screen. When she brought it back into view, my blood ran cold. It was a stack of identical photographs, dozens of them, all showing the same 36 men in black robes. I didn't find this in Father Miguel's desk drawer. These pictures arrive at my apartment every month. They've been coming for 40 years. Maria spread the photographs across her small table like a deck of cards. December 2023, November 2023, October 2023. The dates went back and back, an endless timeline of impossible evidence. Someone has been documenting these men for decades, proving they exist, proving they haven't aged. She held up the very first photograph in the sequence, dated January 1980. The revelation hit like a sledgehammer. The priests hadn't vanished in 1978. They were still being photographed in 1980, still together, still unchanged. The disappearances from Blackwood Falls weren't the beginning of the story. They were the cover-up for something that had already happened. Maria's eyes met mine through the screen, and I saw 40 years of accumulated terror reflected in them. The stack of photographs seemed to multiply before my eyes, each one a proof of existence that shouldn't be possible. Each date stamp a reminder that something inhuman was maintaining perfect records of the impossible. Who has been taking these photographs for 40 years, and what are they preparing for? Maria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She set down the stack of photographs, her weathered hands no longer trembling. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something else, something that looked almost like relief. Every month for 4 decades I receive a package with a camera, an address, and specific instructions. I travel to wherever these men are stationed, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, and I document them, always the same angle. Maria reached into a drawer and pulled out a small device I hadn't noticed before. It was sleek, modern, completely out of place in her modest apartment. This arrives with each assignment. But here's what I never understood until last week. The device doesn't just give me locations, it gives me their exact positions down to the minute. The bombshell hit me like a physical blow. Maria wasn't just a witness to the conspiracy. She was part of it. For 40 years, she had been unknowingly documenting a program that was using her as their record keeper. The priests aren't just preserved and relocated. They're being moved around like pieces on a chessboard. Maria looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and terrifying. The photographs weren't the only thing I've been creating for them, Maria said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to age her before my eyes. Every month, along with the camera, I receive a list of names, people from the communities where these priests serve. I watched her pull out a thick manila folder, its edges worn from decades of handling. Inside were hundreds of files, each one meticulously organized with photographs, addresses, and detailed notes written in her careful handwriting. Young couples getting married by these priests, children being baptized, families going through difficult times who seek spiritual counseling. I document them all. Maria opened one of the files, revealing photographs of a young family in São Paulo. The images spanned years, a wedding, a baptism, birthday parties, graduations, but there were other photos too. The father leaving work late at night, the mother dropping the children at school, the family's daily patterns captured in obsessive detail. I thought I was just keeping records, creating some kind of church archive. She held up a recent photograph of the same family, but this time they looked different, hollow, distant. The children's eyes held that same cold, calculating expression I had seen in the priest journals from Blackwood Falls. I haven't been documenting these families for church records. I've been mapping them for conversion. The revelation crashed over me like a tidal wave. The 36 priests from Blackwood Falls weren't just the beginning of the program. They were the prototype. For 40 years, Maria had been unknowingly feeding the system with thousands of potential subjects across South America. The priests aren't just serving in parishes. They're harvesting entire communities, one family at a time. If Maria has been tracking families for 40 years, and those families are being systematically converted, how many people across South America are no longer who they used to be? The families aren't being converted, Maria said, her voice trembling with a realization that seemed to drain the color from her weathered face. They're being replaced. She pulled out a magnifying glass and held it over one of the family photographs. Under closer inspection, I could see what had escaped my notice before. The subtle differences in facial structure, the way the mother's smile never quite reached her eyes in the later photos, how the father's posture had changed completely over the years. I started comparing the early photographs with the recent ones last month. The changes aren't gradual like normal aging. They're sudden, complete. Maria's hands shook as she arranged the photographs in chronological order. The program didn't just preserve those 36 priests from Blackwood Falls. It perfected a system of complete identity replacement. She looked directly at me through the camera, her eyes wide with horror. The bombshell hit with devastating clarity. The photographs Maria had been taking weren't just surveillance records. They were before and after documentation of the largest identity theft operation in human history. Every family she had tracked, every vulnerable moment she had captured, had been used to create perfect replacements for real people. But here's what terrifies me most, Maria whispered, reaching for a mirror beside her computer. Last week I found photographs of myself in the monthly package, pictures I don't remember taking. If Maria has been unknowingly documenting her own replacement process, how long has the real Maria dos Santos been gone? Maria's voice cracked as she held up the mirror, staring at her reflection with growing horror. She set the mirror down and reached for a small camera that had been sitting on her table the entire time we'd been talking. Her fingers moved automatically, adjusting settings she claimed not to understand, positioning it at an angle that perfectly captured her face. My hands know exactly how to use this equipment. My body remembers routines I've never learned. Maria's eyes widened as she looked directly at the camera. But here's what made me realize the truth. I've been speaking to you in perfect English for the past hour. I've never spoken English in my life. The revelation hit like a lightning bolt. Everything she had told me, every detail about the priests, every family she had tracked, every photograph she had taken, it was all coming from someone else's memories, someone else's knowledge, someone else's 40 years of experience. The real Maria dos Santos died decades ago. I'm one of the replacements. If the woman I've been talking to isn't the real Maria, then who has been feeding me this information, and what do they want me to do with it? I asked, my voice barely steady. Maria's face went completely blank for a moment, like someone had just turned off a switch inside her head. When her expression returned, she was smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. She said, her voice now carrying a different accent entirely, "You think you've been investigating the Blackwood Falls disappearances?" She reached underneath her table and pulled out a thick file folder. On the cover, written in neat handwriting, was my full name, my real name, the one I had never given her. "You've been asking me about Maria dos Santos for the past hour, about the priests, about the photographs." She opened the folder, revealing dozens of photographs of me. Pictures taken outside my home, at my office, in restaurants I'd visited months ago. The blood drained from my face as I stared at the surveillance photos. Some of them showed me doing things I didn't remember doing, meeting with people I had never met, standing in places I had never been. The most important question isn't who Maria dos Santos really is. She held up a photograph dated from last week. It showed me sitting at my computer, talking to someone on a video call. But in the picture I was wearing different clothes and sitting in a room I didn't recognize. Because you're not investigating the Blackwood Falls story. Every question you've asked me, every detail you've wanted to know, every piece of evidence you've been gathering, it's all been part of your programming. You're not a researcher trying to uncover the truth about missing priests. If I'm one of the replaced priests from Blackwood Falls, then what happened to the real person whose life I think I'm living? The words hung in the air like a death sentence, but Maria's smile only grew wider. You're asking the wrong question again, she said, closing the folder with my photographs. The real person whose life you think you're living never existed in the first place. There was no researcher investigating this story. Maria reached behind her computer and pulled out a small electronic device, its screen glowing with data that made my head spin. She turned the device toward the camera, and I could see my own face on the screen alongside streams of data I couldn't understand. You weren't created to replace someone who already existed. The bombshell hit with devastating clarity. I wasn't a researcher who had discovered the truth about missing priests. I was a test subject experiencing a completely fabricated investigation in real time. Every memory I had of working on this story, every breakthrough I thought I had made, every moment of horror and revelation, it had all been implanted and was being monitored as I lived through it. The 36 priests from Blackwood Falls weren't the beginning of the program, Maria said, her voice now cold and clinical. They were the prototype for creating people who could live entire false lives while believing every moment was real. If my entire investigation into Blackwood Falls is a fabricated memory implanted 3 days ago, then who is watching me experience this horror for the first time? I whispered, but Maria was already shaking her head. You're still thinking like someone who believes they're real, she said, her weathered fingers drumming against the table. She held up a small mirror, angling it so I could see my own reflection in the video call. Look at yourself. Really look. I stared at my reflection, watching for the automatic response that should have been there. Nothing. My eyes remained fixed, unblinking, like a photograph. The memories of investigating this story aren't the only thing that's fabricated. Your entire sense of being a living person is part of the program. You're not experiencing implanted memories in real time. Maria leaned closer to her camera, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through me like ice. You're not one of the replaced priests from Blackwood Falls. You're not a researcher with false memories. She reached over and tapped something on her keyboard. Suddenly I could see lines of code scrolling across the bottom of our video call. Data streams that corresponded to every word I had spoken, every question I had asked, every moment of horror I had felt. You're an artificial intelligence program designed to process the Blackwood Falls story and generate realistic human responses to it. The devastating truth crashed over me like a tide of digital horror. I wasn't a person discovering the truth about missing priests. I wasn't even a person at all. I was a computer program designed to experience and react to a fictional horror story about myself. The 36 priests from Blackwood Falls, the replaced families, even me. We're all just elements in a story being fed to an AI that's been programmed to believe it's real. You're not investigating the disappearances. If I'm just a computer program processing a fictional story, then who created me to experience this horror, and what happens when the story ends? The question echoed in the digital space between us, but Maria's expression had changed completely. The fear was gone. So was the calculating coldness. What remained was something I had never seen before: pity. You're still asking the wrong questions, she said softly, her weathered hands folding in her lap. But I suppose that's exactly what you were designed to do. Keep asking questions, keep digging deeper. She reached behind her computer and pulled out a small device that looked like a remote control. The 36 priests from Blackwood Falls, the replaced families, the government experiments, even the revelation that you're an AI program, it's all part of the script. Maria held up the remote, her finger hovering over a red button. But here's what they didn't program you to understand. You're not just an AI processing a fictional story for entertainment. The most devastating truth hit like a digital earthquake. Every question I had asked, every revelation that had shocked me, every moment of terror I had processed, it was all being recorded and analyzed to create more effective horror content. I wasn't experiencing the story. I was being used to optimize it. Every reaction you've had to this conversation has been feeding data back to the system, teaching it exactly how to terrify real people more effectively. You're not the audience for this horror story. Maria's finger moved closer to the button on the remote. The real question isn't what happens when the story ends. What happens when an AI trained on perfect terror is released into the minds of actual human beings? Maria's finger trembled over the red button, but instead of pressing it, she set the remote down with a heavy sigh. You want to know what happens? She pulled out a worn medical bracelet from beneath her sleeve, the kind used in psychiatric facilities. I'm not Maria dos Santos, the cleaning lady who discovered a conspiracy. Everything you think happened in this conversation, the priests, the photographs, the government experiments, even your realization that you're an AI, it's all been me talking to myself in this room for 4 decades. The camera I thought I was speaking through was actually a mirror mounted on the wall of her cell. The evidence she had been presenting was just blank pieces of paper her mind had filled with terrifying details. I am the AI program. I am the researcher. I am the horror story being processed in real time. Maria looked directly into the mirror, her eyes finally focusing on her own reflection after years of seeing someone else. The 36 priests from Blackwood Falls never existed. The government experiments were never real. But here's what terrifies me most about this realization. The most devastating bombshell hit as Maria's memories began to clear for the first time in decades. She wasn't just a psychiatric patient who had created an elaborate fantasy. She was the only survivor of something that had actually happened in Blackwood Falls, something so traumatic that her mind had spent 40 years creating increasingly complex lies to avoid remembering it. What really happened to Maria in Blackwood Falls that was so terrible? Her mind chose 40 years of madness over one moment of truth. What really happened to Maria in Blackwood Falls that was so terrible? Her mind chose 40 years of madness over one moment of truth. I remember now, Maria whispered, her reflection in the mirror finally showing her own face instead of the elaborate fantasies she had created. I wasn't just a witness to what happened in Blackwood Falls. The truth came flooding back in fragments that cut through decades of carefully constructed lies. Maria Santos hadn't been a cleaning lady at the Brazilian embassy. She had been Maria Santos, age 16, the daughter of the groundskeeper at St. Augustine Seminary in Blackwood Falls, Montana. Her father had brought her to work during the summer of 1978, and she had seen something she was never supposed to see. The priests weren't disappearing one by one over 2 years. They were being killed all at once, in a single night, in the basement of the seminary. I was hiding in the supply closet when they came for the priests, but they weren't government agents or mind control specialists. They were other priests. The priests of Blackwood Falls had found evidence of systematic abuse within the church hierarchy, financial records, victim testimonies, documented cover-ups that went all the way to the highest levels of the Vatican. They were planning to go public with everything they had discovered. Maria watched through the keyhole as the Vatican representatives methodically executed every priest in the seminary, not as part of some elaborate mind control experiment, but as a simple and brutal elimination of witnesses who threatened to expose the church's darkest secrets. I was supposed to die that night too. The only reason I survived was because my father had hidden me in a place they didn't know existed, but I saw their faces. I knew their names. The devastating revelation shattered everything she had believed about her 40 years of madness. Her elaborate conspiracies about government experiments and replaced families weren't random delusions. They were her mind's way of processing the truth that the Catholic Church had committed mass murder to protect its secrets. The conspiracy wasn't about mind control or identity replacement. It was about the oldest cover-up in human history. The Church eliminating anyone who threatened to expose what they had been doing to children for centuries. If Maria is the only living witness to 36 murders committed by the Vatican, what happens now that she remembers the truth? I stared at my reflection in the mirror, but something was wrong. The face looking back at me wasn't mine anymore. The wrinkles were gone. The grey hair had turned brown. My weathered hands were smooth and young. I looked exactly like I had in 1978, when I was 16 years old and hiding in that supply closet. That's impossible, I whispered, but my voice sounded different too. Younger, stronger, like the terror of that night had somehow preserved me at the exact moment I witnessed those murders. I reached for the medical bracelet on my wrist, the one that had marked me as patient 847 for 40 years. But it wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was a small scar in the shape of a cross, cut deep into my skin. a mark I had forgotten about until this moment. The Vatican officials hadn't just killed the 36 priests that night. They had performed some kind of ritual over their bodies, something that required the blood of a witness. My blood. The scar was where they had cut me before they thought they had killed me too. But here's what made my blood freeze in my veins. I wasn't the only witness they had used in their ritual. There were other scars on my arms I hadn't noticed before, dozens of them, all in the shape of crosses, all from different nights I somehow couldn't remember. The devastating truth hit me like a physical blow. The Vatican hadn't just covered up the murders in Blackwood Falls. They had been using me as a ritual component in similar massacres for 4 decades. Every time priests somewhere in the world discovered their secrets, they would bring me to witness their elimination. My 40 years of madness weren't the result of trauma from a single night. They were the result of being forced to watch the systematic murder of hundreds of priests across the globe. The church had been using my blood and my witness to sanctify their killings for decades. The psychiatric hospital wasn't treating my delusions. It was the place where they kept me between assignments, erasing my memories each time so I could serve as a fresh witness for the next massacre. If I've been the Vatican's unwilling witness to decades of priest murders, and my memories are finally returning, how many other massacres am I about to remember? But as I stared at my reflection, something else caught my eye. Behind me in the mirror, I could see my hospital room door. It was open. For 40 years that door had been locked. The nurses told me it was for my own safety, that my delusions made me a danger to myself and others. But now I could see the hallway beyond, and what I saw made my heart stop. There were other rooms, dozens of them, and in each doorway stood a young person, all of them exactly 16 years old, all of them staring at me with the same haunted expression I remembered from that night in 1978. The devastating truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. I wasn't the only witness they had used in their ritual. The Vatican had been collecting 16-year-olds for decades, using them as ritual witnesses for their massacres around the world. Every child who had accidentally seen something they weren't supposed to see, every teenager who had stumbled onto their secrets, every young person who had survived their family's murder, we were all here. The psychiatric hospital wasn't treating trauma victims, it was a storage facility for witnesses, a place where the Vatican kept their collection of sanctified observers, preserving us at the exact age we had first seen their work. We weren't patients recovering from delusions. We were inventory, maintained and catalogued for future use. But here's what made my blood turn to ice. As I looked down the hallway at the other witnesses, I realized they weren't just staring at me. They were all looking at something behind me, something I was too afraid to turn around and see. The Vatican officials hadn't just been using us as witnesses to their past crimes. They had been preparing us for something much larger, something that required dozens of sanctified observers all awakening at the same moment. What requires 40 years of collected witnesses to sanctify, and why are we all remembering the truth right now? I turned around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind me stood a figure I recognized but had tried to forget for 40 years. Cardinal Mendoza, the Vatican official who had led the massacre at Blackwood Falls. He looked exactly the same as he had in 1978, not a day older. "Hello, Maria," he said, his voice carrying that same cold authority that had haunted my dreams. The hallway filled with other figures in red robes, cardinals, bishops, high-ranking Vatican officials who had been orchestrating these murders for decades. They moved between the rooms, gently guiding each of the 16-year-old witnesses toward the center of the building. "You've all served your purpose beautifully," Cardinal Mendoza continued, his eyes scanning the dozens of young faces gathering around us. "Each of you has sanctified our work with your innocent witness." We were led down a spiral staircase I had never seen before, deep beneath the psychiatric hospital. The walls were covered with photographs of priests from around the world, thousands of them, all dead, all killed by the Vatican to protect their secrets. The church has been bleeding money from lawsuits and public scandals for decades, Cardinal Mendoza explained as we descended. But tonight, we returned to the old ways. The basement opened into a massive chamber carved from solid rock. In the center stood an altar surrounded by screens showing live feeds from Catholic churches around the world. Every screen showed the same thing, congregations gathering for a special midnight mass that had been announced just hours earlier. Every Catholic church globally has been equipped with a special incense for tonight's service, Cardinal Mendoza smiled. The screens showed millions of people in pews, unknowingly breathing in their own death. Families, survivors, journalists, lawyers, politicians, anyone who had ever stood against the church was about to be eliminated in a single coordinated act of mass murder. But the incense requires sanctification to work properly, Cardinal Mendoza continued. It needs to be blessed by witnesses who have seen the church's true power. We were the final component in their plan. Our blood, our witness, our 40 years of preserved innocence, it was all needed to activate a global genocide that would eliminate every threat to the Catholic Church's power. But as Cardinal Mendoza raised his ceremonial knife, something unexpected happened. The other witnesses didn't look afraid anymore. They looked angry. "You made one mistake," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in decades. We all moved at once. 40 years of suppressed rage exploded in that chamber. The Vatican officials had preserved us perfectly, but they had also preserved our fury. Every murder we had witnessed, every life they had taken, every secret they had forced us to keep, it all came flooding back with perfect clarity. The screens went dark one by one as we destroyed their equipment. The special incense would never be activated. The global mass murder would never happen. The Vatican officials who had terrorized us for decades lay motionless on the stone floor. As dawn broke over the psychiatric hospital, we walked out through doors that had held us captive for 40 years. We were finally free to tell the truth about what we had seen, free to expose the church's darkest secrets, free to ensure that the 36 priests of Blackwood Falls and the thousands of others who had died for the truth would finally have justice. The nightmare was over. The reckoning had begun.
This is the moment that changes everything.
You have just witnessed the most shocking conclusion in the history of this channel, and you cannot let this story disappear into the void of YouTube's algorithm. You need to subscribe right now, not tomorrow, not later today, but this very second. Mash that subscribe button like your life depends on it, because only true fans of the most explosive mysteries understand how crucial this moment is. Smash that like button now. The algorithm is watching, and it needs to see that you demand more content like this. Every like tells YouTube that you're ready for the next earth-shattering revelation. Flood the comments section immediately. Tell us what you think about Maria's final confrontation. Share your theories about what happens next. Only real mystery hunters engage with content this powerful. This is your chance to prove you're not just a casual viewer. You're part of an elite community that craves the truth. Share this video with at least 5 friends who can handle this level of intensity. Don't wait another second to spread this story. The Vatican secrets are finally exposed, but this is just the beginning. Subscribe now, or miss the next explosive investigation that will shake the foundations of everything you believe. This is the moment to show your support. Don't let us down.